Weeks before the soldiers came, a 15-year-old girl lay dying in the freezing mud of a German camp. Her head had been shaved, her body was ravaged by typhus. She had thrown away her own clothes because they were crawling with lice, and she was wrapped in nothing but a rough blanket. She was starving, feverish, and hallucinating, and she died believing the most heartbreaking lie of all, that her father, her mother, and her sister were already dead, and that she was completely alone in the world. That girl was Anne Frank. Most of us met her in a classroom, a bright, hopeful Jewish teenager who hid from the Nazis, kept a beautiful diary, and left behind one shining sentence about believing people are good at heart. That is the Anne the world chose to remember. But the real story doesn't end in a cozy attic with a hopeful thought. It ends in that mud. And almost everything gentle we were told about her was shaped, softened, and edited after she could no longer speak for herself. Anneliese Marie Frank was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt, Germany. Her father, Otto, was a thoughtful, quiet businessman from a respectable Jewish family. Her mother, Edith, was warm and devout, and her older sister, Margot, was the calm, obedient, almost impossibly well-behaved child, the kind of daughter parents brag about. Anne was the opposite. Loud, quick, curious, and stubborn. She talked constantly. She argued. She wanted to be seen. For the first few years, the Franks had an ordinary, comfortable German life. But in January 1933, that life was quietly signing its own death warrant. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Almost overnight, being Jewish stopped being a background detail and became a target painted on your back. Otto Frank saw the danger before most people did. He made a decision that would define everything. He would get his family out. In 1933, he moved to Amsterdam and began building a new business selling pectin, the ingredient that makes jam set. One by one, the family followed him to the Netherlands. Anne, still a toddler, became a Dutch girl. She learned the language, made friends, roller skated through the streets of Amsterdam. For a while it looked like Otto had saved them. But escaping Germany was only the first door. The second door was the one that mattered, and the free world was about to slam it shut. Because Otto Frank did not want to stop at the Netherlands. He could see the shadow spreading across Europe, and he wanted to get his family somewhere truly safe. He wanted to get them to America. And here is one of the most gut-wrenching facts of the entire story, a fact almost no schoolbook mentions. Otto Frank tried desperately for years to bring his family to the United States, and America said no. The paperwork survives. We can read it. Otto filled out forms, gathered documents, secured sworn financial support from relatives already in America, and begged for visas. But in the late 1930s and early 1940s, the United States operated a rigid immigration quota system that allowed only a tiny number of people out of each country per year. The waiting list for German nationals swelled into the hundreds of thousands. There was also open political suspicion of Jewish refugees, a paranoid fear that spies might be hiding among them. So the paperwork was delayed, then delayed again. Then a rule change made it nearly impossible. The francs were not turned away because there was nowhere to put them. They were turned away because a bureaucracy decided their lives were not urgent enough to bend the rules. And while those forms sat in filing cabinets, the window slammed shut for good. In May 1940, Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands. In 5 days, it was over. The country Otto had chosen as a refuge was now occupied territory. The family that had run from the Nazis once now had nowhere left to run. The quotas, the delays, the suspicion. They hadn't just failed the Franks. They had trapped them. And then, on Anne's 13th birthday, June 12th, 1942, something small and ordinary happened that would eventually make her one of the most famous people who ever lived. She was given a present. A red and white checkered autograph book with a little metal clasp. She decided to use it as a diary. She began writing to it as if it were a real friend, a confidant named Kitty, pouring in every thought she had. She could not have known that this cheap little notebook would outlive her, her family, and the entire regime that murdered her. She had barely been writing for 3 weeks when the terror arrived at the door. In early July 1942, a call-up notice landed at the Frank home, not for Otto, but for Margot. The Nazis were summoning the 16-year-old to report for so-called labor in Germany. Everyone understood on some level what that really meant. Otto had been secretly preparing a hiding place for weeks, and now there was no more time. On the morning of July 6th, 1942, the Frank family walked out of their home in the pouring rain, wearing as many layers of clothing as they could pile on because carrying suitcases would look suspicious. They left dirty dishes in the sink and an unmade bed, so it would look like they'd fled abroad in a hurry. They disappeared into a place that would become legendary, the Secret Annex. It was a cramped set of rooms hidden behind Otto's own business at Prinsengracht 263. The entrance was concealed behind a swinging bookcase. The whole space was roughly 450 square feet. And into that tiny hidden world, 8 people would eventually be crammed together. The 4 Franks, then a business associate, Herman van Pels, with his wife August and their teenage son Peter, and finally an 8th person, a dentist named Fritz Pfeffer. 8 people, 1 hiding place, and a rule that governed every waking hour. During the day, while workers filled the offices and warehouse below, they could not run water, could not use the toilet, could not cough, could not walk in shoes, could barely move. They lived in enforced silence for hours at a time every single day, terrified that one wrong sound would end everything. This is the part the school books do cover: the diary, the annex, the bravery. But even here, the tidy version leaves out how much this arrangement cost a 13-year-old girl. Because Anne was not a saint in that annex. She was a real teenager trapped in an impossible situation. She fought bitterly with her mother, Edith, and filled her diary with sharp, furious complaints about her. she clashed with Pfeffer, the dentist she was forced to share a room with, whom she found insufferable. She ached with loneliness. She wrestled with her changing body, her first stirrings of desire, her fear that no one really understood her. She wrote about all of it: the anger, the despair, the boredom, the longing. She was becoming a writer in real time, and she was brutally honest on the page. She even reworked her own diary, hoping that one day, after the war, it might be published as a book. She had a title picked out. She wanted the world to read her. What she wanted was to be known, completely, truthfully, flaws and all. Remember that. It matters enormously by the end. For 761 days, they survived like this. 2 years of whispered days and anxious nights, of shared fear and small, stubborn joys. And then, on the morning of August 4th, 1944, the swinging bookcase was pulled open from the wrong side. Someone had betrayed them. An SS sergeant named Karl Josef Silberbauer, acting on a tip, arrived with a small group of Dutch collaborators and went straight for the hidden door. There was no dramatic search, no confusion. They knew exactly where to look. And that single chilling detail has haunted the story for 80 years. Somebody told them. To this day, no one has ever proven who made that call. Over the decades, suspicion has fallen on a warehouse worker, on a cleaning woman, on various neighbors and associates. As recently as 2022, a heavily publicized investigation claimed to have finally cracked the case and named a suspect. But within weeks, professional historians tore the theory apart, and the book making the claim was pulled by its own publisher amid an apology. So we are left with the same unbearable void we started with. Someone the Franks may have known. Someone who understood exactly what would happen to 8 hidden people, picked up a phone, and we will likely never know their name. The 8 were taken away, and here the schoolbook story quietly ends, with the raid, the arrest, the sad but bearable image of capture. Almost no one teaches what came next, but what came next was 7 months of escalating horror, and it is the true heart of Anne Frank's story. The prisoners were first sent to Westerbork, a transit camp inside the Netherlands. Then, on September 3rd, 1944, they were forced onto a train. This was not just any train. It was the very last transport that would ever leave Westerbork for Auschwitz. If they had gone undiscovered for just a few more weeks, that train might never have carried them. It held 1,019 people, packed into cattle cars for a 3-day journey with almost no food, no water, and a single barrel for a toilet. On September 5th, the doors were hauled open at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Of the 1,019 people on that transport, 549 were sent straight to the gas chambers that same day. More than half, murdered within hours of arrival. Anne, Margot, and their mother Edith survived the first selection only because they were judged young and strong enough to work. Otto was separated from his wife and daughters on the platform. He would never see any of them alive again. What happened to Anne there is stated plainly, because it should be. Her head was shaved, a number was tattooed onto her arm. The bright, talkative girl who had wanted so badly to be seen was reduced, deliberately and systematically, to a body and a number. This was the machinery working exactly as designed, to erase the person before it destroyed the body. But Auschwitz, as unthinkable as it sounds, was not where Anne died. In late October or early November 1944, Anne and Margot were selected for transfer to another camp in Germany, Bergen-Belsen. Their mother, Edith, was left behind at Auschwitz. She would not survive. In January 1945, weakened and starving, having reportedly saved scraps of her own food for her daughters right up until they were taken from her, Edith Frank died. The mother Anne had raged against in her diary, spent her final strength trying to keep her children alive. The sisters, meanwhile, were sent to a place that was descending into hell. Bergen-Belsen was not built with gas chambers. On paper, it was a holding camp. But in the final months of the war, it collapsed into one of the deadliest places on Earth through sheer catastrophic neglect. Tens of thousands of prisoners were crammed into a camp with no functioning sanitation, almost no food and no medicine. Bodies went uncollected. Lice were everywhere. And with the lice came typhus, a disease that swept through the starving population like fire through dry grass. Prisoners died by the thousands week after week of disease, cold, and hunger. Into this the two Frank sisters were thrown. There is one witness account from this time that is almost too painful to repeat. A childhood friend of Anne's, a girl named Hannah Goslar, was also imprisoned at Bergen-Belsen, on the other side of a barbed wire and straw barrier. One day she heard a voice she recognized and made contact with Anne through the fence. The confident, sharp girl Hannah remembered was gone. Anne was freezing, skeletal, and weeping. She told Hannah that she had nothing left to live for. She believed her father had been killed. She believed her mother was dead. She had no idea that Otto was at that very moment alive. Hannah managed to throw a small package of food over the barrier. Anne cried out that another prisoner had snatched it away. Hannah tried again days later. That was one of the last times anyone who knew her saw Anne Frank alive. Then came the final blow. Sometime in February 1945, Margot, the quiet, gentle, perfect sister, succumbed to typhus and the ravages of the camp. And Anne, already gravely ill, already convinced she had lost everyone, gave up. Weakened beyond recovery, tormented by fever, she died within days of her sister. For decades, the world assumed both girls died in March. But in 2015, researchers at the Anne Frank house cross-checked survivor testimonies and camp records and concluded they had almost certainly died earlier, in February. Which means the cruelest arithmetic of this entire story is this. British troops liberated Bergen-Belsen on April 15, 1945. Anne Frank died roughly 2 months before rescue arrived. She was 15 years old. She was murdered, not by a single bullet, but by a phone call, a quota, an occupation, and a disease allowed to run wild in a camp the world was letting rot. She was one child. She was also one of an estimated 1.5 million Jewish children the Nazis killed. Only one of the 8 people from the Secret Annex survived the war. It was Otto. He had endured Auschwitz, been liberated by Soviet troops, and made the long, agonizing journey back to Amsterdam, still clinging to the hope that his girls might have survived somewhere. Slowly, unbearably, he learned the truth. First, that Edith was gone. Then, months later, confirmation that both Margot and Anne had died at Bergen-Belsen. He was a father who had lost everything. And then Miep Gies, the loyal employee who had risked her own life for 2 years smuggling food to the hidden family, handed him something she had quietly saved. After the raid, she had gone back into the ransacked annex and gathered up the pages of Anne's diary from the floor, where they lay scattered. She had kept them locked in a drawer, unread, hoping to return them to Anne one day. Now there was no Anne, so she gave them to the only person left. Otto Frank sat down and read his daughter's diary, and by his own account, he was stunned. He said he had never truly known the depth of what went on inside her. The furious arguments, the private fears, the towering ambition, the inner life she had hidden even from the people who loved her most. He decided the world needed to read it too. In 1947, the diary was published in Dutch. It became one of the most widely read books ever written, translated into dozens of languages, selling around 30 million copies. It made Anne Frank immortal. But the diary the world fell in love with was not exactly the diary Anne wrote. And that is the final, quiet heartbreak of her story. Because Otto Frank did not publish everything. Faced with his murdered child's most private thoughts, a grieving father made choices. And those choices shaped how the entire world would remember her. He softened her. He trimmed the passages where Anne wrote with raw fury about her mother, the woman who had just died saving her. He removed her frankest reflections on her own body, her sexuality, her private questions about growing up, the intimate writing of a real adolescent. He edited out some of the sharpest conflicts among the people in the annex to protect the living and the dead. The result was gentler, more hopeful, more universally comfortable than the real thing. None of this was villainy. It was a broken man trying to honor his daughter while shielding her, and others from a world he wasn't sure could handle her completely. But the effect across decades was profound. The angry, funny, sensual, complicated, ferociously honest girl who had reworked her own pages dreaming of being read as she truly was, that girl was quietly smoothed into a symbol, a gentle martyr, an inspirational quote on a poster. The version of Anne the world wanted, rather than the whole one she had begged to be. The truth was eventually restored. In 1986, and again in a fuller edition in the 1990s, scholars published the complete, unedited diary, giving Anne back her own voice. And in 2018, researchers using digital imaging finally deciphered 2 pages that Anne herself had once covered over with brown paper, the last hidden corner of her innermost thoughts recovered at last. Piece by piece, The real girl was returned to the record, and the real girl is more powerful than the symbol ever was. Because the single line everyone quotes, that in spite of everything, she still believed people were truly good at heart, was written by a girl in hiding, before the cattle car, before the shaved head, before the mud. She wrote those hopeful words, and then human beings betrayed her, packed her onto a train, tattooed her, starved her, and left her to die of disease within sight of rescue. The world loves that quote, because it lets everyone feel that something good survived. But Anne didn't write it as a comfort for us. She wrote it before she knew how the story ended. The most heartbreaking truth about Anne Frank is not just how she died. It's that even after all of it, we still couldn't bring ourselves to know her completely. The way she asked on the page to be known. Thanks for watching channel. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.